Hello friends and welcome to Scary Berry. As you can see, the voices have changed quite a bit. Not the ones in your head, the ones on the video. So today, I will be reading the top 3 most disturbing Let's get into story 1. Let me give a little backstory about myself. I am an active hunter with my father, who was a drill sergeant for the US Army, and uncle who has been hunting game for roughly 20 years of his life. I'm fairly new to the hunting scene, with only 7 months of experience, but nonetheless, I find it absolutely fun and appealing. This is the only experience in which I was actually scared for not only my life, but the lives of my father and uncle. This is how it began. It was a cold but fairly good Friday afternoon. I just got home from school and my uncle decided to stop by and plan a hunting trip to a new area we've never been to before. I forget the actual name, but it was somewhere around Michigan. I was really happy since it would be the first time I've traveled there, and we were going to spend the whole weekend there as well. We got packed up and drove roughly 4 to 5 hours, stopping by some gas stations on the way for some snacks and obviously gas. The whole ride there, my dad kept telling me to keep my eyes open and not stray far away from him or my uncle, since it was a new area for all of us. We had multiple weapons in the car, including some pistols and a couple of bolt-action rifles alongside a machete I brought from home. We finally arrived to Michigan, to an area completely surrounded by woods, but we decided to stop and stay at a local motel for the remainder of the day since it was already 10 p.m. and it was dark. Let me just say that this motel gave off a really creepy vibe. Anyways, we check in and we were escorted to our rooms. We settled down and prepare for the day ahead. The next day, early in the morning, we were having breakfast and then weirdness started setting in. We were eating at a local diner and everyone kept staring at us. Not to mention the whole place was silent and the only sound filling the air was our spoons and forks hitting our plates. Then, from out of nowhere, a friendly old man came to us and introduced himself. Even though he was friendly, he probably gave out the creepiest vibe out of the whole entire place. He then proceeded to say, "Hi strangers, what brings you into the parts of Michigan? Are you folks from around here?" The whole time, he was staring at me, and he gave out an awful odor, like a mixture of cheap cigarettes and urine. My dad caught his gaze and said, "Hey man, no, we aren't from here. We traveled over here to do a little bit of hunting. We got tired of seeing the same thing, so we decided to go somewhere new." The old man seemed a bit cautious at first, but then let out a huge smile, his teeth 50 shades of black. Also, I noticed that everyone stopped looking at us, but the air still felt heavy for some reason. "Oh, okay. We enjoy seeing new faces around. Let me give you a piece of advice though. If you start traveling too far into the woods and start seeing weird markings on the trees, I would suggest you turn back. They don't take kindly to new faces." "They?" my uncle said, almost choking on some water. The old man replied, "The wood folk, some sort of cult in the woods. Rumor is that they like to dress up as these creatures with the heads of skeletal remains like deers and wolves, only to take wandering strangers and sacrifice them to the wood spirits." The last part sounded like the old man was just messing with us. I gave my father a weird look and he only managed to give a half a smirk. We told the old man that we'd keep an eye out. After that weird experience, we decided to hurry up and went our way. As soon as we got into the truck, we couldn't help ourselves and started laughing, taking everything the old man said, practically throwing it behind us. The drive only took about 15 minutes from the motel, and during the ride, the only thing on my mind was how gorgeous the scenery was. I felt as if I was in a different world. The forest gave off something only being there in person would cause. The closest thing I can describe was paradise. I was utterly mesmerized. The first step I took while getting out of the car felt as if I had stepped through the gates of heaven. A peaceful, silent breeze made way towards me. The fresh air hitting my nose, taking that deep breath and releasing made me feel as if I had no negativity in me. The forest sounded alive. You could hear the birds chirping, the squirrels making their way to their homes in the trees, and the sound the branches made as the breeze slightly hit. "Wow," my father said, towards my uncle. "This is totally different from what we see back home." I could see the smile on my uncle's face. We ended up walking for what felt like hours, and we finally got to the spot, putting our things down and establishing our tents on fire. It was only 4 p.m. and the forest was still alive. After putting our camouflages and face paint on, we started heading to the area in which we were going to hunt at. Only 30 minutes passed, and we found what seemed to be some tracks, but these were odd tracks. They were actually human tracks, but as if someone was walking barefoot. My uncle said maybe we aren't the only ones out here, but the footprints looked fairly old. I had totally forgotten about what the old man had said, and it seemed like my uncle and father did too, since no one mentioned it. We decided to go further into the forest, leaving markings on the trees to know our way back to our campsite. We walked roughly for 45 minutes, and my uncle was just about to mark the tree when he saw that another marking was already there. We examined it, and it looked like nothing we've seen. The best way I can describe it is a circle with a cross in it, with 4 different symbols in the spaces between the cross and the circle. That's when I realized about what the old man had said about the markings. I couldn't help but getting kind of anxious, but I didn't need to bring it up because my father did. We all kind of looked at each other, and my uncle stating he did his research on the area and found nothing about any cult in these woods. Not a single thing. We all kind of laughed, but we realized something. We realized the woods were quiet, like too quiet. We knew that didn't mean any good, so we decided to go back to our camp since the sun was already setting. Not 10 minutes go by and we hear movement to our right. There was a half-broken tree in the middle of a small opening. It looked like as if the grass there was dead, the only area that seemed out of place. Then, from behind the tree, we could have sworn we saw a figure, but it was too fast to tell since it looked like it had moved from behind the tree. Then, we all heard it. A scream. Not a scream for help or in danger, but a scream that sounded territorial, as if it was getting ready to attack us. We booked it. We ran as fast as we could, while still being able to see the markings we had left on the trees to show our way back to the camp. But for the life of me, I could have sworn I heard what sounded like multiple people running slightly far from us. So I turned around and saw something that still gives me goosebumps to this day. There, roughly 15 feet behind us, 3 6-foot figures wearing some sort of animal skin. I only knew that because I could see their bare legs, and they seemed to be wearing skeletal remains on their heads. I could also slightly make out one of them had some sort of weapon, and to make matters worse, they were all screaming. Well, hollering, I could say. As I was running, my father and uncle stopped right alongside each other, turned around and started shooting. I immediately heard a thud hit the ground and the sounds of someone in pain. That seemed to stop the figures, since one headed straight for his fallen comrade while the other one just stood there, panting and staring right at us. I could make out a human face behind that skull. We ran and ran until we got to our campsite. We only took our weapons and booked it out from there. When we finally got to the car, I must have blacked out, because when I woke up, I remember being on a highway and my father and uncle with worried expressions when they noticed me. I can clearly see the tears running down my uncle's face, and my dad stopping at a gas station and giving me a hug. After that, we made it home. My uncle hates himself because if it wasn't for his idea, that wouldn't have happened. Me and my father don't blame him. We are all just happy that we were safe. But one thing I do know for sure, if you're out there hunting in the woods of Michigan and you see those markings on the trees, leave immediately. Story 2. A National Park Horror Story. This story I'm about to tell, only a few people close to me have ever heard. However, I never actually explained in detail what happened that night to absolutely anyone. For this story specifically, it is necessary to explain my general area I live in as it pertains to this event. I live next to Yellowstone National Park, which in of itself has drawn millions of tourists each year. Part of the reason I am writing this is merely a warning to people who decide to visit during the summer months. Last year in the summer of 2020, me and some of my buddies decided to go and have a night out and do some camping out near a spot we have been to multiple times in the past. After all, this was right after things started to become normal again and lockdowns were lifted. I decided to head up to the camp spot early in an effort to make sure my gear was still set up from earlier that day. I did this as an effort to reserve the spot as it's first come first serve. Therefore, with everything in hand, I left my house right before sunset. We were all supposed to meet up within the hour, so I didn't really have any concerns of being by myself. I then began my 30-minute drive up to the location. When I finally arrived, I immediately noticed my tent and everything inside was gone. Now, just for some context, I staked the tent down in multiple areas just to be sure it stayed for the period I was gone. Inside was my sleeping bag and a few other miscellaneous items I left just to keep it weighted down. However, everything, literally everything, disappeared as if it was never there. I looked around and even the stakes and rocks I placed on the outside were missing. I immediately knew something was wrong because I did not see any campers on the way up. Also, keep in mind, I do not have cell service, as it is a couple miles back into the wilderness. I then decided to drive back down from where I came from to get service and get a hold of my friends and let them know what happened. Needless to say, I was not happy with the situation. I knew that whoever took my belongings was still in the area, as only an hour or two had passed. However, my friends insisted that I stayed and at least hang out for a few hours as it took weeks of planning. So, Once I made sure everyone arrived, I then decided to go around the area in search of any sign of footprints or indications that maybe these people were close by. As you can guess, I wasn't able to find anything. I eventually played it off and decided I would just look for it in the morning and contact the Forest Service to report it missing. I also didn't want to ruin the party for everyone, and I decided to stay. In hindsight, this was by far one of the worst decisions I could have ever made. As the night went on, everything seemed fine, so I thought. Around 1 or 2 in the morning, most of my friends decided to call it a night. I ended up sleeping in my truck. This was perhaps one of the better decisions I made that night. That, along with always making sure to bring my bear spray and sidearm for protection from unexpected guests. I eventually fell asleep. However, it's important to note that I was still a bit on the edge, as only a couple hours before all my belongings were taken. I decided to leave my window rolled down a bit, just in case I heard anything creep up on us in the middle of the night. After about 2 hours of me being asleep, my worst nightmare came true. At first, I just heard something moving around outside my camp. This was enough noise to wake me up, and I immediately froze and didn't move whatsoever. Therefore, this was partially because I knew whatever was making the noise was large, not just a raccoon or any smaller creature. I then was paralyzed just listening intently to whatever was happening outside our camp. My first thought was that it was a bear. At one point, I swear it could have only been maybe 20 to 30 yards away. Also, another key point I noticed was that there was absolutely no other noises. Usually, there's grasshoppers or birds, but it was complete and utter silence. Now, in a wilderness, that's never a good sign. It means there's a large predator or something of the like in the area. Meanwhile, it's pitch black outside and our fire had completely gone out. After about 15 minutes of not hearing anything, I decided I just needed to stop being paranoid. But just as I was about to fall asleep, I saw something to the right of our campsite. It was just a few yards away from the fire pit, and probably about 20 yards away from me. To my absolute horror, it was a person. I immediately freaked out. This was no average person either, let alone the fact that it's 3 or 4 in the morning and you're in someone's campsite. This person was wearing what I made out to be some kind of mask. I got a very good look at whoever it was, and it was a deer skull on their face. They were wearing a black robe, and that's about all I noticed. I sure didn't want to leave my truck and confront this person, so I did what I thought was best. I turned my truck on and began honking the horn until all my friends were awake. I rolled down the window and told them we need to get out of here immediately. After seeing what I saw, they did exactly that. Meanwhile, this person hasn't moved, mind you. Just as I thought the situation was bad, it got even worse. 4 of these figures began appearing in front of us through the trees, wearing the same outfits as mentioned earlier, but with multiple different masks. I immediately put my truck into reverse and began speeding away. They began walking closer and closer, but luckily I was able to drive out of the spot in time. As I began to speed down the road, out of there, 3 more of these figures appeared out from the side of my truck, this time with a dog, and way more aggressive than the previous ones I saw. They began throwing rocks at my truck and chasing after me. At one point, they were literally right next to my passenger window until I accelerated even more and eventually lost them. As I looked back in my mirror, I saw only one figure left, just simply peeking and staring at me behind a tree. This image is forever seared into my head. From this night on, I refused to ever go back up there. I've never ever spoken of this to anyone. Even when I was around my friends that experienced this, we never mentioned to each other. It's been over a year now since this happened, and well, all I can say is that I believe these people were in some sort of cult. I heard some stories about similar events happening and even cattle completely disappearing. It's very barbaric, and you wouldn't think that such a beautiful national park that attracts so many people year-round would have such dark and disturbing secrets. My advice to anyone that travels here, to these mysterious and preserved parks of intrinsic beauty, would be to always bring protection of some kind. Likewise, make sure you always let others know about your plans and never go alone. Stay safe, everyone. Alright, thanks guys for listening to my stories. Make sure you like and sub. Make sure you comment down below. Share this with your friends. And let me know, is the AI voice better or is my voice better? Because I feel like my voice is so much more annoying. And stay very scary.